Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to give people a chance to come in. We'll probably get started 1 minute after, um, 1 minute after the start time. But hello, welcome. And we're excited to start this Q&A webinar. All right, welcome. And again, we're going to get started in just a second once we allow people to kind of filter in. All right, hello. Hello and welcome to the NSF X-Labs Q&A webinar for the sensing and imaging topic. My name is Becca Shamil. I'm an associate program director within the NSF TIP Directorate, TIP being for technology, innovation, and partnerships. So we are specifically going to discuss the scientific instrumentation for sensing and imaging X-Labs topic that was announced as part of the first batch of NSF X-Labs. And we're going to be available today to answer any questions you have on the X-Labs initiative. You can also find a recording of our previous webinar where we presented an introduction to the NSF X-Labs and the slides associated with that webinar on the X-Labs initiative webpage on nsf.gov. So before you, just very briefly before we start putting questions in the Q&A, please do click the Q&A button to submit your questions. Your question has the best chance of being answered if you begin the question with the number of the category that it would belong to. So this is going to help us organize the questions that are coming in. I've put this up very briefly. We're going to go through a few other slides, and then I'm going to leave this slide up for the rest of the webinar so that you can see the different categories. But if you have an initial question that you need to get in really quickly, please use one of these 7 categories and start your question with one of the 7 numbers. Thank you very much. And you can also take a look at the topic announcement documents that are present on sam.gov. So I really want to highlight the documents available for you for your reference during this webinar. So we'll be reviewing information from these documents throughout the webinar. The first document is the Other Transaction Agreement Solutions Offering, also called the OTASO. This essentially is the overall master solicitation for X-Labs. The second is the topic announcement specifically for scientific instrumentation for sensing and imaging. The OTASO is going to contain details about the overall NSF X-Labs opportunity, and the topic announcement provides the information about the timeline and the specific scope of the sensing and imaging topic. Both of the documents are going to be hosted on sam.gov, where NSF posts all of their contract solicitations. We also have a new announcement as of hopefully just a few minutes ago that is an amendment to the OTASO. So Joda, do you want to come up and discuss the amendment?
Yes, thank you, Becca. So I want to just start off with a high-level overview of what this amendment is intended to clarify. I want to underscore that this, for us is a clarification. So we don't see this as being a substantial deviation from what the OTASU was trying to achieve, but we have heard a large volume of questions around the autonomy factor test, which we are now reframing as an autonomy factor assessment, which now has a set of objectives that we are looking for teams to meet through a number of standards. And this is intended to really guide teams as they're proposing their model. It is not a set of bright line rules that are subjected to a sort of legalistic test or specific bright line rule, but rather these are objectives for teams to really try and meet as they're trying to hew to the NSF X-Labs program model. So you'll see that they've been reframed just slightly from the way the original OTASU in section 6.1.1 originally outlined. So I think practically speaking, this should effectively resolve a lot of the concerns that many institutions, particularly institutions of higher education, may have had as they were discussing their eligibility requirements. At the same time, we really do want to underscore that these are going to be standards that we are holistically reviewing, and we do want teams to really try to achieve and demonstrate that they are hewing to these set of factors or standards. So I'll quickly run through them, and then I've got one more slide, and then we can take additional questions that I'm sure many of you are going to have over this as we get further into the program. But NSF X-Labs should have a leadership structure that allows teams to make decisions quickly and efficiently. They should have broad internal autonomy on how funding is allocated. Senior key personnel for the X-Labs team should retain broad control of the research direction and partnership agreements. X-Labs should adopt an intellectual property framework that credibly prioritizes and enables technology proliferation, encourages broad use, and is not unnecessarily constrained by restrictive policies and or constraints that are not required by law. NSF X-Labs should retain broad decisional authority over hiring, salary negotiation, procurement, and contracting as necessary for the team to pursue its mission. And then finally, the NSF X-Labs governance structure should be structured to encourage mission alignment, operational autonomy, and institutional independence. Again, these are quite similar to the autonomy factor test we originally had, but I think this really reinforces that these are holistic standards, not sort of thou shouts, and we are going to evaluate them as they come in and try to figure out, does this meet fidelity to the program model, recognizing that there are lots of different models that could meet these standards. Next slide, please. So just to recap, these are objectives and not, and sort of broad standards, not rigid, specific, bright line legalistic rules. They're also not mutually exclusive, so or mutually exhaustive rather. So there may be a series of edge cases where a team cannot fulfill one of these standards in a particularly satisfactory way, but the rest are potentially well accommodated or represented in the proposal. And I think that would be considered holistically. Additionally, there may be a factor that wasn't listed there that we had not thought of, but does create a real autonomy or independence problem. I think you can glean what we're looking for in the objectives, but just know these broad standards are there to help guide your proposal development. And again, these are subject to a holistic review, not a legalistic one. And then nothing in this section is intended to wholesale restrict any institutional participation in NSF X-Labs unless it's otherwise explicitly spelled out in the OTASU, nor is it designed to preclude or discourage any institutional best practices, policies, or practices or policies designed to eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse, or broad legal compliance. So again, these are designed to ensure at the objective level that the teams have sufficient autonomy to accomplish their mission, but again, not to sort of discourage you all from putting in common sense best practices. Additionally, the team does anticipate that there are going to be multiple ways to demonstrate fidelity. So we aren't going to tell you exactly how to reach these standards. That is your job in putting the proposal together. But we do anticipate there are going to be many different kinds of proposals that meet or satisfy these standards across each objective. And we've intentionally designed that level of flexibility in. Finally, many of the objectives are going to require long-term planning and negotiation, particularly if you have an NSF X-Lab hosted inside a parent institution. We know and understand that. And we anticipate that if a team is selected for a Phase 0 award, they're going to continue to work on evolving and developing that approach to further align with the program model. It's really important for folks to understand what is required at the Phase 0 proposal level, which is a lightweight 8-page proposal that really tries to get at what is your big picture idea and qualifications and demonstrable capability to accomplish that mission, and then enough about your program model to show that it's or your approach to show that it has fidelity to the program model. we'll get into further questions about what's required in the phase 0 application in a little bit, but just know that many of the things and questions that we have gotten are about a wide range of specifics that aren't even required in the phase 0 application process. We know that you will have a lot of questions, and we anticipate that many of those, if you're selected for a phase 0 award, would be worked on through a negotiated process, and where you all are actually provided the opportunity to work on that during that phase 0 award period, performance period. So with that, I will turn it back over to Becca.
Thank you. And I just want to quickly say this should be posted on sam.gov. We have been having some issues with sam.gov today that we were made aware of. So if it's not currently posted there, please be patient. It should be there by the end of the day. And also, if you are looking at a previous version of the sam.gov update, please just take a look at the version drop-down menu that's in the top right corner of the sam.gov application, web application. You should be able to select a different, more updated version of the sensing and imaging update to see the OTASO amendment. So here's the timeline for the sensing and imaging topic. We're gonna dedicate a lot more time to answering your specific questions here. The written proposals are going to be due on July 13th. Oral presentations will take place sometime the week of August 17th. And we do anticipate that teams will finish negotiations with NSF around October and begin their phase 0 by November. So after a 9-month phase 0, the phase 1 would then start around August 2027. And then the go-no-go selection process is going to begin about 2 months prior when NSF will begin evaluating phase 0 progress to determine which teams transition to phase 1. And with that, I would like to invite everyone to join our Q&A session. So please welcome back our moderator, Bridget Taraga, and our Q&A panelists, Joda Tongnapnua and Flo Thiels, Adam Russell, and Patrick Breen. They are going to help me answer your questions during this Q&A webinar. And to participate, please do click on the Q&A button to submit your questions. Your question, again, has the best chance of being answered if you begin the question with a number of that category. That's going to help us organize the questions coming in.
Great. And I'm going to start with asking a few questions that have been coming into our email inbox quite regularly. And then we will be compiling all of the questions that you're asking here. So Adam, I'm going to put the first question to you, please. Should the entire team be confirmed starting from phase 0 or starting from phase 1? Are the teams expected to be the same throughout all phases, or is there any area for change during the phases?
Thanks, Bridget. Can you guys hear me? Check, check. Okay, good. Sorry, I feel like a long-time listener, first-time caller. So I'm new to the X-Labs team. Super excited to be here. So new, in fact, that I don't have the NSF background. So I hope people will forgive me. To your question, Bridget, one of the things I'm most excited about with X-Labs is, frankly, the degrees of freedom that are being baked into the initiative to ideally go from, again, research insight to real-world impact. And as part of those degrees of freedom, will it necessarily involve like team composition. So I think our expectation is that during phase 0, certainly the majority of the team should at least be identified early on. You're going to come up with a compelling idea for a scientific breakthrough in this area. It also helps, therefore, to have a sense of who are you going to do it with. But we're expecting that teams will continue to evolve into phase 1 and phase 2. The reality is you're going to need a range of personnel experience, or at least we think you may. And that experience, as a result, will change as you develop and as your program or your effort goes forth. So our working hypothesis, right, and as much as it's sort of experimental about this design, that is that teams should grow and evolve as your needs grow and evolve. And that could include senior and key personnel, subcontractors, advisors, part-time employees. So to summarize again, NSF X-Labs is set up to be flexible, to allow each team to propose the right composition of leadership and interdisciplinary expertise So we really encourage you guys as you put these things together to think about what specifically you're trying to drive towards, and therefore the team you're going to need to get there. I mean, I see this as an opportunity to like almost kind of build the dream team that you would love to have to get after this new opportunity. So you will be able to add senior key personnel and other roles outside of senior key personnel throughout the phases. So the takeaway from that is the team should grow and evolve as your needs grow and evolve.
Thanks so much, Adam. The second question is for Joda, and it's on IP. Joda, what IP framework is required to satisfy the NSF X-Labs autonomy factor assessment?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I hope this answer begins to put a little bit of concerns and anxieties to rest, but also doesn't have so much specificity that it locks anybody into a particular solution. But first, NSF is not going to be able to offer detailed guidance on which IP framework is going to make sense for your X-Lab team prior to being selected for a Phase 0 award, because we specifically expect there are going to be a number of approaches that actually satisfy the autonomy factor assessment. I will say, however, that teams are not expected to develop an IP management plan prior to Phase 0. That IP management plan is a milestone that will be baked into the Phase 0 performance period. And that IP management plan should reflect the X-Labs programmatic intent to facilitate and enable broad technology dissemination that's unencumbered by institutional restrictions that might severely limit the capacity of an X-Labs team to broadly out-license the technologies developed during the performance period. If I put it sort of simply, NSF expects X-Labs teams to have substantial input and control over the IP produced by the team during the period of performance, and that there is a credible process for getting that technology out to the world that doesn't involve restrictions or policies that make it very difficult for that technology to actually get out. And again, in the Phase 0 application process, there is a brief amount of information in the proposal. Actually, once you were selected to submit for an oral presentation, that actually goes into a fair amount of detail. There are some level of detail about what your vision for the IP management is. But again, it is not a full IP management plan. We anticipate teams are going to be working on this when they are selected during the Phase 0 process. Again, you'd want to figure out that it's possible with your parent institution, if you're going to have one, or have an idea of how you might implement one. But we recognize that some of these negotiations are going to take real time, and we just want to have a sense that it's really credible.
Thanks, Joda. Becca, the next question is for you, and it's related to eligibility. Are university faculty eligible to apply to the NSF X-Labs solicitation based on the IP, full-time, and independent organization requirements?
Yeah, I mean, our answer is absolutely. We do anticipate that there will be a number of senior key personnel and non-senior key personnel that are able to participate in the X-Labs initiative. We don't put forward exactly what those arrangements might be, if they're tenure track or if they're already tenured at a specific institution. They could take a leave of absence. They could have another type of arrangement that would assign them to an X-Lab that's kind of existing and hosted by a university. There is actually just a wide range of different arrangements that we anticipate might be allowable for a senior key personnel to be a university faculty member. The caveat is that during Phase 1, all senior key personnel are expected to be dedicated 100% to the team. So the arrangement that is made needs to allow for that. And also not all senior key personnel, or I'm sorry, not all faculty might participate as senior key personnel. We might expect that they are sometimes part-time, or there's a possibility that they could be contracted, that the team could contract a lab to do some work for them. They could also be advisors or simply staff members that are not, again, senior key personnel. So we do anticipate, and especially with this new amended ATASA, we do anticipate that a lot of faculty members might be able to participate in this type of program.
Adam, if I can call you back, I have another question. Can FFRDCs or staff scientists at national laboratories serve as senior key personnel with institutional approval?
The answer, I believe, at this moment is we are working on coming up with very specific guidance to address that. And where we sit right now is in the absence of that specific guidance, and given the timelines and the speed with which you want to move, folks are encouraged, if you're interested in proposing, that you should still identify the specific FFRDC or national lab collaboration that you have in mind, and you should definitely put that under the team capabilities of your written proposal. That's the best we have right now, but I think that's the right way forward.
One thing just on that is recognizing that we have we're coming up on deadlines. We're aware of that. I just want to make folks aware that there will be an FAQ coming very shortly with that specific answer. We have it kind of in there, slotted, ready to go, but just wanted folks to know that we do have an answer coming very shortly.
Thanks, Joda. Yeah, 100%. What he said.
And Joda, while you're on camera, is there an application? Is an application more competitive if it comes with matching funds or cost share?
Cost sharing is not required for applicants, nor is it a prerequisite for advancing beyond phase 0. I think the reality is that we recognize that teams are going to be coming in with an idea, and they're beginning to sort of shape their team. And so at this point, cost share is not required. The structure of phases 0, 1, and 2 are intended to provide the necessary support for achieving key milestones. So the budget provided through this program is designed to provide that necessary runway itself. While additional leverage resources are certainly can enhance the opportunities, they're not essential for phase 0 progression, nor do I think we're going to be putting a significant amount of weight on if there is a significant cost share coming with a proposal. That's not necessarily going to dramatically swing your proposal one way or the other. I think the main thing is going to be, do you have a novel breakthrough idea that has potentially sector-wide impacts? That's going to be a much more significant factor in weighing your proposal.
Great. And if I can invite my colleague Patrick Breen on now for a question. Patrick, what can we expect from the negotiation period for the OT contract?
Right. So unlike our traditional instrument types, grant and cooperative agreements, OTs are inherently more flexible and allow for a different execution towards award. So the process will require some active engagement from the acquisition staff, from program staff, but also from the potential awardee. And the negotiation period is really focused on ensuring that we have a mutual understanding and come to mutual agreement on the terms and conditions of the award, finalizing any sort of milestone or milestone-based payments that are relevant to that particular award. And most of the process will occur in advance. You'll be able to see a set of standard terms and conditions, most of which are currently in the published ATASA. There's also guidance in the NSF Other Arrangements and Other Transactions Guide that's available online at NSF. So really what we'll be focusing on is negotiating around the specifics of that potential awardee's proposal at that given point in time. But the bulk of that information is already out there, already available for folks to view. And for awareness, the OTASO in both of the topic areas have been updated on sam.gov, so you should see the amended version of the OTASO in all of those postings.
Thank you, Patrick. And I'm going to invite Flo Thiels, who's one of our subject matter experts, to join us for this next question. Flo, we've seen a lot of teams ask some version of the question, is our sensing and imaging idea actually in scope with the X-Labs program? What is the best way to help teams figure out whether their idea is in scope?
Great question, and I already see some versions of that question in the Q&A today. So we encourage teams to step back and from their specific gadget or technique they have in mind and look at the ambition of the platform technology they're proposing. For the sensing and imaging topic, X-Labs is intentionally looking for teams that can build radically new classes of scientific instruments, things that could redefine what we're able to measure or observe. And so when teams ask us whether their ideas in scope, we suggest the team asks themselves a few questions. I'm going to present to you three. One question is, does our screening and imaging technology push beyond today's limits in a way that could open new scientific frontiers, something we simply cannot measure or observe today? The second question is it a platform technology rather than just an incremental update? The third question you should ask yourself is, are we aiming for the kind of high-risk, high-reward acceleration for which X-Labs is designed? And so if the answer to these questions is yes, it's clearly aiming to expand the frontier, not just tune up what already exists out there, then it's quite possible that your idea is in scope. Ultimately, X-Labs are about building the scientific instruments that we dream we had, those that could unlock new discoveries across disciplines. And so we encourage teams to think at that level of ambition, very high ambition, when they're gauging fit.
Thank you, Flo. Adam, we have a question about exit strategy. What is the exit strategy for the X-Labs teams? What happens after phase 2?
That depends on you all. That depends on the performance. And what I mean by that is, again, our mission in a very real way at X-Labs is to go from like the research insights that seem possible to the real world impact that's actual. And so I think we can imagine, and there's a great opportunity here for lots of people to help us imagine different exit strategies for these X-Labs teams. I mean, ultimately, our hope is that the platform technologies that are produced here will, be launched and survive in the wild, right? Some will be commercialized, as Flo just said, seeding an entire field of science or technology breakthrough. In some cases, an X-Lab could turn into a small business or startup. In other cases, X-Labs may have accomplished their goal and found some other exit strategy, so they no longer need funding after phase 2. I think the whole goal is to enable and preserve the degrees of freedom that X-Labs are going to need to go from that insight to impact. I think one example that I could imagine would be the NSF Tech Accelerator, for example, being ready to catch some of these X-Labs, especially with breakthroughs. And they could be well positioned as a potential avenue for teams to move into the real world again once they've reached higher technology readiness levels or TRLs. Sorry if it's my time at DoD or DoD has led to acronyms. Some teams might need a phase 3, and that's going to be decided, of course, on a case by case basis, depending on the technical promise and the situation we're in front of. But again, that's part of the degrees of freedom of the program. Why I'm really excited about it. So most importantly, though, please. Where you hear degrees of freedom, think creativity, right? So these shouldn't be considered as like prescriptive or the only options for sort of graduating from X-Labs in terms of this transition and exit strategy. We think paths will vary from team to team. We're excited to see the different paths that teams will take. And I think it's important to say that the teams don't have to know exactly what that looks like in phase 0, though obviously we want them to be thinking about that. Again, back to a mantra I kind of live by, which is, the actual proves the possible. So help us take your possible and make it actual.
Great. Thanks so much, Adam. So now we're going to enter into the phase where we answer all the questions that have been coming in the Q&A chat. There are many questions, so I'm going to invite our panelists to be brief in answering them so we can get through as many as possible. So here's the first question in our proposal submission and review section. Can the proposal be submitted as a collaborative proposal with each participating institution submitting separately, or should the proposal be submitted solely by the lead organizations with the other institutions included as sub-awardees?
We do not have sub-awardees in X-Labs. We have potential subcontractors. And so only the lead institution should submit the proposal. And this is not intended to fund consortia. It's not intended to fund partnerships between many different institutions. We're looking for that tight individual team that can bring together a range of expertise. And yes, they might subcontract out to different places and they might have different partnerships. We encourage them to have different partnerships. But we are looking for a cohesive team that is independent and non-traditional, and that can act with a lot of purpose to fulfill their mission. Patrick, I saw that you unmuted, and I wonder if you could provide some insight as well.
No, that's exactly it. The issue is that unlike like grants where we see a lot of collaborative proposals, we are only going to award to one legal entity. That entity can have subcontracts, they can form a joint venture, they can have some other formal business relationship, leading to an organization that has a unique entity identifier. Right, so that organization that submits has to be registered in SAM.gov, has to have that unique entity identifier. That legal entity is the only one we will have privity of contract with.
Great. For our next question, it's about the written proposal. For the submission of the written proposal, are the cover letter, table of contents, and references considered outside of the page content, of the page count? If this is allowed, how will this be managed? The submission portal limits the file size to 8 pages.
Yes, it does. The cover letter is going to be the information that you submit along with your proposal. So it does not include the it is not included in the 8 pages because it's the the name, the point of contacts, all of that information that you put into the application site. The 8 pages should be holistic of everything, including references.
And regarding letters of collaboration, the standard NSF one-sentence commitment, is that what's expected for letters of collaboration, or is a more detailed description of each collaborator's role expected?
For the written proposal, you only need to submit the team capability statement, which is going to describe how you intend to set up the X-Lab, the different team members that you're bringing with expertise, as well as the different partnerships that you might be bringing. For the letters of collaboration that would be submitted with the oral proposal package, those should be letters of collaboration that describe how you are going to set up the partners and the X-Labs. So I'm not sure that I fully answered that, but there is not going to be a very standard exact letter that is exactly the same that as what we use for grants management.
Thank you. Now on to team eligibility and setup. Can a university faculty member lead an X-Lab through an independent LLC or startup as the responsible entity while maintaining their university appointment?
So I think this is, it's technically possible. I think I would check with your university to determine whether or not, what their requirements are for your participation. I also think that one of the things that would be important is that the senior key personnel listed on the project are a full-time equivalent on the X-Labs work. And that means that by phase 1, the senior key personnel represent the equivalent of a full-time employee's worth of time dedicated to that. Now, and I think that we would be very skeptical if there was also a significant teaching or administrative burden that the senior key personnel was also taking on simultaneously. And that's really to ensure that they have the dedicated time to focus on what is a fairly ambitious endeavor. That said, we recognize that it's going to take time for folks to transition, which is what the phase 0 period is for. Additionally, there's the possibility that yeah, we've gotten a number of questions about things like, how do I transition my research that's already been funded? I think it's important to recognize that some of that research, assuming that it is related to the work that you're doing at X-Labs, may very well kind of fall into the work that you're doing at X-Labs if it is related to the mission. And I think that's a thing that you have to figure out during the phase 0 process. If it's not, then I think you will need to begin to transfer that to a co-PI or otherwise wind down that work. Additionally, the work that all personnel need to be doing is not the same as what's required of the senior key personnel, or put another way, not everybody needs to be full-time, just the senior key personnel. But to come back to the sort of original question, can I apply through an independent LLC or a startup or whatever independent entity? Yes, you can submit as an independent entity, but I think it would be challenging for you to sort of maintain a status quo relationship with your university. You probably would need in that process to resolve, and this may be something you work on during your phase 0 if you were selected for one, how you're going to negotiate that relationship between your university and the independent entity that you're full-time at, starting in phase 1. Open the floor to my colleagues if they want to correct anything I've said.
And Joda, can I build on that and ask a question that has a little bit of overlap?
Sure.
If X-Labs investigators are using university lab space or facilities, would that be considered in-kind support? How would you recommend teams think about structuring those arrangements?
Yeah, so first off, that kind of arrangement we anticipate, we expect that universities or parent institutions or maybe other kinds of resources are going to have a subcontracted or a partnership arrangement where they're able to leverage outside resources. We certainly don't want folks recreating the wheel. Awards resulting from the X-Labs OTASU are going to result in a fixed payment structure. And there are no indirect costs that are explicitly proposed, but things like indirect costs should be included in your budgeting process that you'll go through later on after the 8-page proposal. So during negotiations, NSF will finalize the payment structure, which we anticipate would include things like how do we compensate the university for use of facilities and other kinds of things that traditionally fall within our conceptualization of indirect costs. So just recognize that it's not a required in-kind donation. There can be subcontracted arrangements and other sorts of things associated with it.
Next question, can NSF clarify the expected legal and organizational structure of an awarded X-Lab? Specifically, could an X-Lab be structured as a nonprofit entity, a for-profit entity, or either?
We're going to answer this or question with a yes. There are many, many different structures that we anticipate would be appropriate for X-Labs. It could be a for-profit, it could be a nonprofit, it could be hosted within a larger institution, such as a university. We have given teams a lot of flexibility to structure the type of team and the type of governance that they see as being as impactful as possible. And I know that is a little confusing when trying to figure out exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for the team and the setup that will have a lot of impact.
Let's move on to talking about budgets, funding, and costs. And Patrick, some of these might be helpful to have you answer. For example, can you explain how funding milestones works? Do we work first and get paid for the completed milestone, or would we have an initial budget to get us started to achieve our first?
So the answer is yes. And this goes down to how we want to structure the award. So milestones do mean that when a specific set of criteria are reached, we would issue payment at that point in time. The awardee would be allowed to invoice, and a payment would be issued, assuming that the milestone met all the criteria for acceptance. In terms of regular cash flow, which I know is a concern of a lot of folks, we have a lot of leeway in how we structure these agreements. Milestones help us with our ability to provide oversight. If there is a requirement for upfront funding or requirements for some sort of a monthly funding amount, those are things that we can discuss and negotiate. But we have a lot of flexibility, NSF does, working with a potential awardee and how to structure payments under a resulting OT. So there's not necessarily one size fit all answer here. We have a little bit of flexibility in how we finalize those agreements.
And Patrick, a couple more questions related to budget. Let me just ask both of them and you can answer. One is related to how is payroll funded? The X-Labs team will have staff and senior key personnel on the payroll. As funding is largely milestone-based, how's payroll funded? And then the second one is about university overhead. Can we structure a phase 0 budget to fund Q1 university activity, including 70% overhead and a separate 9-month corporate budget with no overhead?
All right, so I think let's talk 2 things. So the first is on payroll and staffing. We have agreements here where there, and again, these would be no different, where some staff activity is funded under those milestone activities, some is funded under potentially a different pool of funding that may provide some base amount of funding on a monthly basis to allow for core operations. Those are all things we can negotiate to make sure that we are ensuring that both the awardee could operate, but also ensuring that we're not allowing individuals to invoice ahead of where they need funding. So that's going to have to be a discussion that we'll work through based on the specific requests, circumstances, and needs of a potential awardee. In terms of structuring budgets, I think the important thing here is we are looking at an award that has fixed amounts. We know that those amounts will include all direct and indirect costs, including things like overhead, but we are looking for fixed amounts. And so if you structure those accordingly, we'll see a number that it'll be inclusive of all those costs you may have required in order for that particular period of performance, but we're not going to necessarily delve into those details unless we want to ask questions about numbers because they seem off. But any number proposed for budget should be inclusive of all direct and indirect costs.
And a little bit more on the budget side of things that either Patrick or the X-Labs teams can dive into. Since phase 0 is a planning phase, what sorts of costs may appear in the phase 0 budget? How much flexibility do teams have about spending budget on capital versus operations versus other things?
Teams have a lot of flexibility to propose what they want to do. We do have the option of having technical milestones during phase 0. And so you absolutely could spend a chunk of the money on the actual execution of the award and the actual execution of the mission and the technical side of things. It's going to be what you need to set up for a phase 0. We will, for those teams invited to submit an oral proposal, we will give you a budgeting document. It'll be a spreadsheet where you can input some of your cost estimates, things like salaries and like that. And again, we'll be evaluating them for cost reasonableness, as Patrick said. But it is going to be a fixed price milestone based contract. And so throughout phase 0 and then to phase 1, you would get structured milestones for milestone payments for fulfilling the milestones, such as the different documents that are going to be required for the go no-go selection.
On the topic of OT contracts, Patrick, are there aspects of the OT contract structure that investigators should consider while preparing proposals that differ from a traditional NSF grant?
Yeah, so there are. So other transaction contracts are not grants, nor are they FAR-based procurement contracts. They are a sort of federal contract, however, right? So the key differences are under a grant structure, under federal financial assistance, There are limits on NSF involvement. There's strict compliance with the uniform guidance, the 2 CFR 200 language. Most folks are familiar with like the PAPG guidance that we put out here in terms of grants. That structure related to grants does not apply. So the key difference is making sure that folks are aware of the set of requirements that do apply. So what we have in that other transactions agreement solution offering, the solicitation document, that governs what we have in the other transactions, other arrangements handbook. Those are important things to know. And then we will apply some statutes and some regulations because they generally broadly apply to federal obligations. But the guidance that the guidance and structure folks may be used to under federal grants and cooperative agreements, especially here at the foundation, will not be applied to another transaction. So pay close attention to the requirements for submission, for certain proposal requirements. That's what governs. There's not an external source of documentation like you might be more comfortable with on the grant side of the house.
Can an X-Lab subcontract administrative services such as payroll, contracting, and procurement? Can that be done to a host institution or a university, for example?
So awardees are allowed to enter into subcontracts for whatever purposes they deem necessary. In terms of those specific tasks, if it makes sense to subcontract those out, there's no prohibition or anything like that. So it does determine, what an awardee needs to determine is what's the best business strategy for them on this particular proposal. And if that is subcontracting out certain functions and retaining others for self-performance, that's fine. We don't necessarily weigh in on that. If the bulk of those activities are subcontracted out or the bulk of work is subcontracted out, we might have some questions around that. But in general, there's no strict prohibitions on what you can and cannot subcontract for.
I'll note that we're also planning on providing support for phase 0 teams, as well as phase 1 and 2 teams, specifically around payroll, back office, legal. There's a range of different support that we imagine a team would need. And of course, if there is a host institution that is supporting the X-Lab team, this would be a good example of what that host institution could supply, especially if they're getting indirect cost.
Can a team that is waiting for their SAM.gov registration still apply to the July 13th deadline, even if they do not get their SAM.gov ID in time for July 13th?
So any potential offer must be registered in SAM prior to submitting their proposal.
Let's move on to some questions about intellectual property. During phase 0, while the host is the contracting party, where should newly created IP reside so the phase 1 autonomy standard is met cleanly? Should our IP management plan address the phase 0 to phase 1 IP transfer directly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is going to be dependent upon, I think, each team. So I don't think there's, and also I imagine some of this is going to be worked out in a phase 0. But I think if you are beginning to assign IP during the phase 0 process, I think it should be designed with the intent that it will, neatly and have some sort of process to transfer over to whatever your phase 1 entity, if you plan on changing that entity, is. I think this is sort of highly fact specific and is going to get into like the evaluation of how your team plans on sort of managing your background and potentially foreground IP. But I think that this is something that we'd look for some level of detail in prior to phase 0, but then I think is going to be broadly explored and negotiated during your phase 0 award.
Our goal is for your IP that's generated to be broadly adoptable and broadly used, not to become an IP that kind of languishes or is not then widely used once it is created. So we really encourage teams to figure out from the get-go how to support that. And we imagine that a lot of the phase 0 will be for trying to figure that out.
Can X-Lab funding be used to license technology from a university, for example, if that technology is required for phase 0?
And without sort of giving a blanket yes or no, I think that that's certainly something that I could see being reasonable as the teams work on sort of how do they acquire their background IP in order to sort of work on the sorts of projects that are aligned with their mission. So I think that that's certainly in the realm of the possible.
Next, we're going to move on to questions about program structure, phases, and milestones. Well, I don't know if this is that question, but this is a good one. Who will review the proposals and what is their background and expertise?
That's a great question. The written proposals are going to be reviewed internally by NSF. So that will be by NSF program directors, as well as other NSF positions. So the internal federal employees and rotators, NSF has a wide range of expertise and a wide range of topics. The flow here is an example of one of our subject matter expertise. She has a deep expertise in sensing and imaging and instrumentation for the TIP directorate. We also have a number of other program directors across different directorates, from MPS, which has our physics and chemistry, as well as the engineering directorate, as well as the biological directorate, and the TIP directorate, where a lot of our technology and translational expertise lies at NSF. And then for the oral proposals, the oral proposal package, that's going to be a mixture of internal, federal, and external expertise. So we're going to have similar internal program directors. We have the option to have external federal employees from across the government, as well as external expertise that is not federal. For those, if they do have, when we do have those external experts, they will be required to sign NDAs, and they will not necessarily have a organizational conflict of interest from their, whatever organization they're affiliated with.
And Becca, what is the plan for the oral presentations? When will folks be notified if they're invited to participate? How many teams will be invited? How many people will be invited for each oral presentation?
I'll answer the last one first. We are not committing to a specific number, and that's because we're really excited for the different ideas that come in, and we want to have the flexibility to invite the number of teams that we think is really exciting. And we also haven't committed to exactly the number of X-Labs we're going to fund either. So it's dependent on you guys. As far as when exactly we're going to have teams notified, let me go back to the timeline and submission. So we're hoping to do a very abbreviated, quite quick written proposal review. So I do expect that teams will be notified of invitation around the beginning of August. They would then have around 2 weeks to prepare their oral proposal package and to prepare their slides for the oral presentation. The caveat that I believe that we give teams about 48 hours to do certain research security requirements and personnel disclosures, and that's because we need a lot of time to process those documents. But this is going to be a quite abbreviated review process.
Many costs increase over time. Is there a mechanism for covering unexpected increases in costs?
So I'll take that one. So the answer is both yes and no. So as we are working through the different phases from 0 forward, we will be working with awardees to ensure that we set the right the right ceilings on funding for those particular phases. But if there is a need to negotiate cost or price increases in the future, that is a discussion that will have to be had by the awardee and NSF, and we'll have to determine whether or not those are appropriate at the time.
Can we talk about limits on proposal submission? Here's one question. If an institution has a few related projects within a particular area where there is some overlap and potential synergy, is it better to submit multiple X-Labs proposals for each project or a single proposal listing the multiple projects?
We're not looking for multiple projects, I think. We're really looking for that huge, high risk, high impact mission. Institutions are limited to submitting two written proposals per topic announcement. And senior key personnel are limited to being listed on one proposal per topic announcement. And we're looking for the best you got. We're not looking for mixtures of ideas. We're not looking to fund general centers that explore a wide range of ideas within one topic. We're looking for that really succinct mission, and we're looking for the best one you got.
Becca, let's get into that in a little bit more detail. Here's a question. The topic asks for platform technologies that could reshape multiple sectors. The scope statement also excludes efforts that advance several research arms without a clear mission. For a genuinely horizontal platform, how do you want teams to balance demonstrating cross-sector generality against committing to one focused anchor mission?
This is a great question. We are looking for the technologies that have the potential, if successful, to impact a wide range of different sectors. An example of this that we've been using has been CRISPR. We've been using that as an example platform technology. It has high impact in like biological research and gene research, has high impact in pharmaceuticals. It has high impact in different genetics therapy areas. There's in the biotech sector and bioproduction sector, biomanufacturing. So that's an example of one topic one mission that could have a really wide range of sector influence. However, it's not necessary that the team during the phase 1 or phase 0 kind of have pre-figured out all of the potential different domains that their platform technology could impact. It may make sense for teams to really focus in on a core domain and a core like mission capability that they need to go in and focus on, with the recognition that if they could make it work, I mean, there's potential for it in a lot of different areas. Part of that question that you asked me, I think, was pulling from what is not in scope, specifically for centers. We're not looking to fund a center that kind of incrementally is able to put forward a lot of different kind of research arms in the way that a department or a larger laboratory might. We're looking again for that targeted mission.
How much emphasis should be placed on instrument development versus the scientific discoveries enabled by the instrument?
That's a good question. Flo, do you have an answer to that?
I can try. I want to go back to what Becca just said. The importance here is on ultimately, whatever you're developing or whatever you're proposing, it should accomplish a particular set of capabilities with broad application. And so one of the application spaces can be discovery, but the instrument itself has these yet to be developed and currently not available capabilities. So it really can open new frontiers, which absolutely can also impact on new scientific discoveries, but that is not the only use, if I may call it that way. So there are many different application spaces. So the breadth or the horizontal aspect comes in the application spaces, but and scientific discovery is among them.
Great. Another question. Many of the most promising platform technologies are general methods whose individual applications already attract private investment, even though the underlying platform does not. How does NSF distinguish a platform that's out of scope because it's already substantively privately invested in from one that's in scope because private capital is funding only narrow downstream applications, not the foundational layer?
This is a great question because we don't have a specific threshold for how much a VC or an industry should have invested in this idea already before it kind of becomes out of scope. The question we're really asking, I mean, this is your guys' taxpayer money, right? Is this effort that we're going to fund going to be funded otherwise? Is this already kind of a hot topic in industry? If so, why would we fund it using this new experimental funding mechanism that is trying to do something very new? So we are looking for those ideas that are maybe for one reason or another not necessarily immediately attractive to a VC, to an industry lab or otherwise, that are particularly high risk, particularly pre-investment, particularly early stage, that could really move the needle. Now, does that mean there has to be no at all funding in this idea? No, of course not. There are, for example, VCs that specialize in high risk early stage ideas. This is a great chance for you to defend to us, to justify to us, especially in your research landscape section of your written proposal, why this is a big idea, what you could do with this money, and why it's not currently being done.
For this topic, specifically scientific instrumentation for sensing and imaging, what would make reviewers view an AI-enabled sensing or imaging concept as a true instrumentation platform rather than a software-only sensor fusion or data analytics project?
I'm also looking at Becca to see if she wants to chime in. If it's just focused on software development, that is not really only on data analytics, it's not within scope. So there is an instrumentation component here. That does not mean that the integration of the instrumentation with the appropriate data analytics and software cannot be part of the larger project. But I invite Becca or someone else here to refine further.
What do you have for us that's really new? This could be in scope. Absolutely. We call it out specifically in the topic description. But what is present that's really a new idea? What is present that's exciting? Please describe that to us, because I do think there's a lot of different areas of kind of AI integration for software that are currently being funded by a lot of industry or by a lot of VCs. So what do you have for us that's really new and exciting?
Can classified information be submitted as part of a proposal?
No, NSF does not deal with classified information.
Does NSF encourage X-Labs teams to build international technology transition pathways, for example, through semiconductor fabrication testing or deployment partnerships with institutions in places like Japan or Europe?
I might let Patrick take this one because he's been quite good at helping me answer some of the emails that have come in on this topic. The important part here is that our goal is US competitiveness. And so it is not necessarily completely disallowed to have international partners. it may be something that really improves the team. However, it is not something that it is going to be highly preferenced because of that goal for US competitiveness. Patrick, how did I get that wrong?
Yeah, no, that's 100% correct. So there are two key things here to consider. One is the posture of the government, where we have a preference for domestic sources of supplies and services. We like to spend our money primarily through obligations to domestic entities. The other part of this is the NSF Buy American Act, because NSF has its own Buy American provisions, where to the extent practicable and consistent with federal law, we would like to make award to domestic sources. That does not prohibit participation of foreign entities. What it does do is just make us all need to be a little bit more cognizant of ensuring that if we are working with non-domestic partners, that we are not working with entities that the federal government should not be working with or through. So to the extent that folks are working with individuals in countries that have Trade Agreement Act related agreements, that would be beneficial to the fact that we are not manufacturing obviously anything in a foreign country. That is helpful, but there are no strict prohibitions. It is, however, our preference to the extent practicable and consistent with federal law, have our awards support domestic operations.
So we do have a few more questions, and so the team's going to stay on for another 8 minutes or so to answer a few more of these questions. This will also be available on the NSF website if you're not able to stay but want to catch up on those later. So here's the question. For the X-Labs concepts that require testing or deployment in extreme environments, for example, Antarctica, the Arctic, or space, how does TIP expect the X-Lab team to coordinate with mission agencies or NSF directorates that are in these environments, such as NSF's Geosciences, Office of Polar Programs, or NASA? Should those relationships be built into the Phase 0 team and letters of collaboration, or would TIP help facilitate those interagency or directorate relationships during Phase 0?
What an exciting question. I think this will be on a case-by-case basis. Of course, the teams should, the proposers should describe what they're interested in and excited about, and what partnerships they already have in their proposals, including the oral proposal. Where appropriate, of course, within NSF, we would coordinate with someone like Geo, or with other agencies. We do anticipate that there would be teams, for example, that would want to leverage existing infrastructure in national labs or in other agencies. This one seems particularly this question seems particularly targeted at the Antarctic infrastructure. How interesting, these types of the way that we could leverage existing programs is something that we could absolutely coordinate, and that we might ask teams themselves to really bring together partnerships for.
Can you please reiterate the citizenship requirement for X-Lab?
Yes. Jordan, do you want to go ahead?
No, go for it.
So there are senior key personnel are not required to be citizens. However, there are 4 citizenships that we will not allow to be senior key personnel. Those include China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Those citizens of those 4 countries, which includes dual citizenship, I have to say, may participate as non-senior key personnel.
Are early career scientists and postdocs eligible to lead an initiative? If so, are X-Labs realistically accessible to early career researchers, or does the scale and organizational complexity favor more established teams?
So I think this isn't a clear-cut yes or no question, but actually more of a holistic analysis. And the bottom line is that the senior key personnel can certainly include early career scientists, postdocs, industry leaders that are earlier in their career, but their ability and track record to execute on the mission that they've outlined is going to be assessed as a team as a whole. So as you build your team, think of the skill sets you're going to need to execute on that mission and whether or not you have the credibility and track record to demonstrate you can do that. Some of that track record may be quite recent. So I think that as you build your team, think of, how you're being able to sort of tell the story about being able to take on a very challenging and novel concept. And I think in that way, there are certainly early career folks that would have a stellar place on a team. I just think you've got to make sure that the reviewing team has confidence that they're within the team is the sort of necessary experience and qualifications to really take on that mission.
And listen, postdocs go off and start startups all the time. I think I'm personally really excited about the opportunities that this could allow for early career scientists and postdocs to have a path that's not strictly in academia or in industry, but a similar path to a startup career where you're kind of forging your own way. I highly encourage postdocs to be involved with X-Labs.
Is there a schedule for the announcement of other X-Labs topics?
We hope to have more information on this very soon. We do anticipate that there will be more topics released in the future, specifically later this calendar year, but not for funding this fiscal year. We will keep you posted, and if you would like to sign up for, you can sign up for updates from the TIP email listing. I do encourage you to do so in order to get any updates of new topics that are posted, and you can check back in on the X-Labs NSF website for any new announcements as well.
Would X-Labs discourage open sourcing software developed as part of our project?
No, I think that is absolutely a completely viable translation pathway. And so, I think we've said this in the written material, commercialization is not the only way that technology can get out into the world. Open source platforms are absolutely viable and have been, the building blocks of some incredible technology that ultimately then goes on to be commercialized from there. So no, open source is
We're looking for IP plans that support broad adoptability, and open source absolutely supports broad adoptability. Now, there are different situations and different topics might be, different fields might be more in the, exclusive, non-exclusive licenses, but open source, absolutely.
Can you please advise if another federal agency can be involved in the partnership?
This is going to be, I think, really specific to, this is, across whether it's an FFRDC, a national lab, or an agency, that agency partner is going to need to have, essentially their leadership team's approval consistent with that institution's operating agreements. And so there's going to be a difference between an agency and a national lab and FFRDC, but that team or that institution that would be a part of a subcontracting or some equivalent partnership, they would need to sign off on that as well. I think some of the challenges around federal agencies are going to be pretty challenging, but I think that outline what your ambition for working with the other agency or FFRDC or national lab is, and then to the extent that is a big part of your proposal, I'm sure will be key to further discussions along the way.
And we have time for just one more question. If you get more than one proposal in an area, do you plan to do any matchmaking or brokering among the proposing teams? Or would you fund more than one project in the same core area?
I don't think we intend to do forced matchmaking in this case. We would fund the team with the, according to the selection criteria outlined in the OTASO, with the best qualifications, with the best team capabilities and setup, and with the best idea that we think has the best idea to move forward.
Thanks so much to the NSF X-Labs team for answering all of these questions, and thanks to everyone in the audience for attending this webinar. A recording of this event will be posted on the NSF website, and we will be hosting a second Q&A focused webinar for the quantum systems topic on Tuesday, June 30th at 2 p.m. So join us again. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.